Good morning. Welcome to Books by Ivan. My name is Ivan and I read books. And today we'll be diving into a philosopher guide to the end of life. With that being said, ladies and gentlemen, make yourself comfortable. This is How to Die by Seneca. Seneca's greatest prose work, the Moral Epistle, is a collection of letters addressed to a close friend, Lucilius, who, like Seneca, was in his 60s at the time the epistle were composed. Death and dying are a prominent theme in his letters, and several deal almost entirely with that theme, including letters 30, 70, 77, 93, and 101. All represented in this volume either in whole or in large part. The letters usually take as their point of departure an event in Seneca's daily life, such as a visit to an ill friend or an idea Seneca had encountered in his reading. Though they take the form of an intimate correspondence, the epistles were primarily written for publication, and the you addressed in them is sometimes Lucilius, but at other times the Roman public or even humanity generally. Epicurus says, "Rehearse for death." Or if this conveyed the meaning better to us, it's a great thing to learn how to die. Perhaps you think it useless to learn something that must only be used once, but this is the very reason why we ought to rehearse. We must study always the thing we cannot tell from experience whether we know. Rehearse for death. The man who tells us this bids us rehearse for freedom. Those who have learned how to die have unlearned how to be slaves. It is a power above and beyond all other powers. What matters to them? The prison house, the guards, the locks. They have a doorway of freedom. There's only one claim that holds us in bondage, the love of life. If it can't be cast off, let it be thus. Diminish that. If at some point circumstance demands it, nothing would stop or deter us from making ourselves ready to do at once what needs to be done. If your friend had been born in Parthia, he would be holding a bow in his hand right from infancy. If in Germany, he would brandish a spear as soon as he reached boyhood. If he had lived in the time of our ancestors, he would have learned to ride in the cavalry and to strike down his foe in hand-to-hand combat. Each nation has its own training to coax and command its members. Which one, then, must your friend practice? The one that has good effect against all weapons and against every kind of enemy, contempt of death. No one doubts that death has something terrible about it, such that our minds, which nature endowed with a love of itself, are disturbed by it. Otherwise, there would be no need to make ourselves ready and hone ourselves for that which we might enter by a certain voluntary impulse. Just as we all are motivated by self-preservation, no one learns to die. No one learns to lie down contentedly in a bed of roses. If the need arise, but rather we still observe for this, to not betray a confidence under torture, or to stand on guard, though wounded through the night, if the need arises, without even leaning on an upright spear. Since sleep has a way of sneaking up on those who lean against some support, but what if a great yearning for a longer life holds you in its grip? You must believe that none of the things that depart from your sight and that are subsumed into the universe from which they sprang is used up. These things pause but do not die, just as death, which we fear and shun, interrupts but does not strip away our life. The day will come again, which will return us into the light. Many will reject that day, were it not that it returns us with our memories. But I will instruct you carefully in the way that all things that seem to die are in fact only transformed. Thus, the one who would return to the world should leave it with equanimity. Just look at how the circuit of the universe returns upon itself. You will see that nothing in this cosmos is extinguished, but everything falls and rises by turns. The summer departs, but the year will bring another. Winter falls away, but its own months will restore it. Night blocks the sun, but in an instant daylight will drive that night away. Whatever movement of the constellation has passed, repeat. One part of the sky is always rising, another part is sinking below the horizon. Let me at least come to an end, but I will add this one thought. Neither infants nor children nor those whose minds are afflicted are afraid of death. It would be repellent if our reason did not offer us the same contentment to which they are led by their folly. Farewell. Dear Lucilius, all health had granted me a long reprieve. Then it came on me suddenly. What sort of illness? You ask. It's an appropriate question, since there is none that I have experienced that I haven't experienced. But one alone is, you may say, my allotment. I don't know what its Greek name is, but it could be fittingly called Suspirium. It comes on with sudden and brief force like a tornado. It's nearly over within an hour. Every physical discomfort and danger passes through me. There's nothing I find more aggravating. And how could I not? This is not illness, that's something else entirely, but loss of life and soul. Therefore, the doctors called it rehearsal for death. And sometimes the spirit accomplishes what it often has attempted. Do you suppose I'm cheerful as I write these things because I have escaped? I think it would be ridiculous to delight in this outcome as though it were a form of good health, just as ridiculous as to proclaim victory when one's court case has been postponed. Yet, even in the midst of suffocation, I did not cease taking comfort from brave and happy thoughts. What's this? I said to myself, does death make trial of me so frequently? Let it. I've done likewise to death for a long time. When was that, you ask? Before I was born, for death is non-existent. I know what that's like. It would be the same after me as it was before me. If death holds any torment, then that torment must also have existed before we came forth into the light. But back then we felt nothing troubling. I ask you, wouldn't you call it a very foolish thing if someone judges that a lamp is worse off after it's snuffed out than before it has been lighted? We too are snuffed out and lighted. In the time in between, we have sense and experience. Before and after is true peace. We go wrong in this, Lucidas. If I'm not mistaken, we think that death comes after, whereas in fact it comes both before and after. Whatever existed before us was death. What does it matter whether you cease to be or never begin? The outcome of either is just this, that you don't exist. I kept telling myself this encouragement and others of the same kind, silently, for there wasn't space for words. Then, little by little, the suspirium, which had already turned into a kind of painting, gave me longer respite and slowed down. But it hung on, and even though it has ceased, I do not yet have natural, easy breathing. I feel a certain break in its rhythm, a delay between breath. Take this on faith from me. I won't tremble. At the last moment, I'm prepared. I don't think at all about the entire day ahead. Praise and emulate that man who does not disdain to die, though it's pleasant to live. What virtue is there in living by being thrown out? Yet, here too is a virtue. I'm being thrown out, but let me take my leave nonetheless. The wise man is never thrown out, for to be thrown out is to be expelled from a place that you leave unwillingly. The wise man does nothing unwillingly. He flees from necessity, since he desires that which it will force upon him. Farewell. Epistle 54. Nothing can be of such great benefit to you in your quest for moderation in all things than to frequently contemplate the brevity of one's lifespan and its uncertainty. Whatever you undertake, cast your eyes on death. Have no fear. By the time Seneca began his magnum opus, the Moral Epistle in AD 63, he had been writing ethical treatises for more than a quarter of a century. His earliest surviving works, from the early 40s AD, are consolation designed to offer comfort to friends or revelations who were mourning the death or absence of a loved one. In the Consolation to Morcia, from which the passage below and several others in this volume are taken, Seneca addresses a mother grieving for the loss of a teenage son. Consider that the dead are afflicted by no ills, and are those things that render the underworld a sort of terror or mere fables. No shadow looms over the dead, nor prison, nor rivers blazing with fires, nor rivers of oblivion. There are no trials, no defendants, no tyrant reigning a second time in a place of unchained freedom. The poets have devised these things for sport, and have troubled our minds with empty terrors. Death is the undoing of all our sorrows, an end beyond which our ills cannot go. It returned us to that peace in which we reposed before we were born. If someone pities the dead, let him also pity those not born yet. To Morcia, 19.4. In this essay on serenity of mind, Seneca makes the case that fear of death not only makes dying more difficult but diminishes the nobility and moral integrity of all life. In the second passage below, he uses Julius Canis, a man otherwise barely known to us, to illustrate the greatness of mind found in those unafraid of death. What's to be feared in returning to where you came from? He lives badly who does not know how to die well. Thus, we must find and foremost reduce the price we set on life and count our breath amongst the things we think cheap. As Cicero says, gladiators who seek by every means to preserve their life we detest, but we favor those who wear the disregard of it like a badge. Note that the same outcome awaits us all, but dying fearfully often is itself a cause of death. Dame Fortune, who makes us her sport, says, "Why should I keep you alive, you lowly, cowering creatures? You'll be more wounded and slashed if you don't learn how to offer your throat willingly. But you live longer and die more easily if you accept the sword stroke bravely without pulling back your neck or holding up your hands. He who fears death will never do anything to help the living. But he who knows that this was decreed the moment he was conceived will live by principle, and at the same time will ensure using the same power of mind that nothing of what happens to him comes as a surprise." On Serenity of Mind, 11.4. Julius Canis, an exceptionally great man, got into a long dispute with Caligula. As he was leaving the room, Caligula, that second Phalerus, said, "Just so you don't take comfort from an absurd hope, I've ordered you to be led away for execution." "Thank you, best of rulers," Canis replied. I'm not sure what he was feeling. I can imagine several possibilities. Did he want to give insult by showing how great was the emperor's cruelty, that it made death seem a boon? Or was he reproaching the man's habitual insanity? For those whose children had been executed or whose property had been taken away used to give thanks this way? Or was he embracing the sentence joyfully, like a grand freedom? Whatever the reason, his replies showed a greatness of mind. He was playing a board game when the centurion in charge of leading off the thrones of the condemned told him it was time to move. Hearing the call, Kenneth counted up the pieces and said to his partner, "See that you don't cheat and say you won after my death." Then he turned to the centurion and said, "You're my witness. I was ahead by one." On Serenity of Mind 14.4. In later life, to judge by the moral epistle, Seneca witnessed the illness and death of many close contemporaries and made careful note of how each man faced his final challenge. He then held up these exemplars for the edification of his friend Lucilius, and through the and through the publication of the letters, the entire Roman world. Dear Lucilius, I went to see Ophidius Bassus, a very noble fellow, a very noble fellow, stricken and struggling with his advancing years, but already there in more to wait, but already there is more to weigh him down than lift him up. For old age is learning upon him with its huge weight everywhere. The man's body, as you know, was ever weak and desiccated. He held or even patched it together for a long time, but suddenly it gave out. Just as when a ship has got water in the hold, one crack or another can be stopped up. One crack or another can be stopped up, but once it has begun to come apart in many spots and to go under, there is no more help for the splitting vessel. Just so, in an old man's body, weakness can be supported and propped up for time. But then, just as in a rotting house, every joint is coming apart and a new crack opens up while you're patching the old, then it's time to look around for a way to live. But our friend Basis stays sharp. But our friend Basis stays sharp-minded. Philosophy furnishes him with this: to be cheerful when death come in view, to stay strong and happy no matter what one's bodily condition, and not to let go even when one is let go of. A great ship's captain continues to voyage even with the torn sails, and if he has to jettison and if he has to jettison cargo, he still keeps the remainder of the ship on course. This is what our friend Bassus does. He looks on his own end with the kind of attitude and expression that would seem too detached, even if he were looking on someone else's. It's a great thing, Lucilius, and always to be studied. When that inescapable hour arrives to go, it's a great thing, Lucilius, and always to be studied. When that inescapable hours arrive, go out with a calm mind. Other kinds of death are intermingled with hope. Illness lets up, fire or put out, ruin bypasses those whom it seemed about to sink. The sea spits out safe and well those whom it had just as violently swallowed down. The soldiers retract his sword from the very neck of the doomed man, but he whom old age leads towards death has nothing to hope for. For him alone, no reprieve is possible. No other way of dying is so gradual and so long lasting. Our basis, our Bassus seemed to be laying out his own body for burial and accompanying it to the grave. He lives like one surviving himself, and bears the grief over himself as a wise man should. For he talks freely about death and bears it so calmly that we are led to think that if there's anything troubling or fearsome in this business, it's the fault of the dying man, not of death. There's nothing more worrisome in the act of dying than there is after death. It's just as insane to fear what you're not going to feel as to fear what you're not even going to experience. Or could anyone think that it would be felt? The very thing that will cause nothing at all to be felt. Therefore, Pessis declares, death is as far beyond all other evils as it is beyond the fear of evils. I know such things are often said and must be. I know such things are often said and often must be said. I know such things are often said and must be said, but they have never done me so much good, either when reading them or hearing people say that we must not fear things that don't hold any terrors. It's the man who speaks from death's own neighborhood that has the most authority in my eyes. I'll say plainly what I believe. I think that the man in the midst of death braver than the one who skirts its edges. I'd say plainly what I believe. I think that the man in the midst of death is braver than the one who skirts its edges. The approach of death lends, even to the ignorant, the resolve to face inevitabilities, like a gladiator who, though very skittish throughout his combat, offers his neck to his enemy and guides the sword toward himself if it strays off target. But the death is only nearby, though sure to arrive, does not grant that steady firmness to resolve a rare thing that can only be exhibited by a sage. I would gladly listen, therefore, to one who can, as it were, report on death, giving his opinion about it and showing what it's like, as though having seen it up close. You would, I suppose, put more trust and give more weight to someone who had come back to life and told you, based on experience, that death holds no evil. But those who have stood in front of death, who have seen it coming and embraced it, can best tell you what sort of upset its approach brings with it. You can count Bassus among these, a man who don't want us to be deceived. Bassus says that it's as silly to fear death as to fear old age. For just as age follows youth, so death follows age. Whoever doesn't want to die doesn't want to live. Life is granted with death as its limitations. It's the universal endpoint. To fear, it is madness, since fear is for things with since death, since fear is for things we are unsure of. Certainties are merely awaited. Death compulsion is both fair and unopposed. And who can complain of sharing a condition that no one does not share? The first step toward fairness is even handedness. But there is no need now to plead the case of nature. She wants our law to be the same as hers. Whatever nature puts together, she undoes, and what she undoes, she puts together again. Truly, if it happens that old age dispatches someone gently, not suddenly, tearing him away from life, but little by little releasing him, that person ought to thank the gods for bringing him after he's had his fill of life, to a rest that is needed by all and welcome by the weary. You see people who long for death, more so indeed than life is usually soft. I don't know which imparts to us a greater resolve, those who beg for death, or those who wait is calmly and cheerfully. The former happens occasionally, owing to madness or some sudden outrage, while the latter is a kind of serenity born of steady judgment. Some arrive at death in a rage, but no one greets death arrival cheerfully except those who have long prepared themselves for it. I confess that I had gone to see Basis, a dear friend, rather often for multiple reasons. In part, to learn whether I would find him the same on every occasion, or within the power of his will diminishes along with the strength of his body. In fact, it only increases in him, just as the joy of chariot drives is often seen more clearly as he approached the seventh and last lap of victory. He would say, in accord with the teaching of Epicurus, that he hoped first and that he hoped, first of all, there would be no pain in his final breath. But if there was, it was certain comfort in its very brevity. For no pain is long lasting if it is great. Moreover, there will be relief for him in this thought. Even if his soul was tortuously torn from his body, that after this pain he could no longer feel pain, but he had no doubt that his elderly soul was already on the edge of his lips, and no great force would be needed to pull it away. A fire that has gotten control of ready tinder must be put out with water, or sometimes by tearing down building. He said, but the fire that lacks fuel dies down by itself. I listen to these words gladly, the silence not because I'm hearing something new, but because I'm being drawn towards what is, as if were, right before my eyes. What then? Have I not seen many other cutting their life short? Indeed, I have, but those who come to death with no hatred of life, who receive death rather than drawing it towards them, make a deeper impression of me. Peirce used to say, that the torment we feel is of our own making. We tremble when we believe death is near, but whom is it not near when it's ready and waiting at every moment, in every place? Let's consider, he says, at the point when something seems to draw near that might cause a death, how many other causes there are. At the point when something seems to draw near that might cause her death, how many other causes there are, even close at hand, which we don't fear. An enemy threatens someone with death, but an upset stomach beats him to it. If we want to separate into categories the reason for our fear, we will find some that exist, other that merely seems to. We don't fear death, but the contemplation of death. Death itself is always the same distance away. If it is to be feared, then it should be feared always. What time is there that's exempt from death? But I ought to be afraid that you will hate this lengthy letter even more than death. So I'll come to an end. As for you, study death always, so that you'll fear it never. Farewell. Epistle 30. It's not death that's glorious, but dying courageously. No one praises death. Rather, we praise the person who saw death stripped away before causing it any turmoil. The death that was glorious in Cato's case was base and worthy of shame in Decimus's. This is Decimus, the man who, while seeking postponement of death, though destined to die, drew a port in order to empty his bowel, and when summoned to his death, in order to bare his neck, said, I'll bear it if I can live. What madness to take flight when there's no going back. What madness to take flight when there's no going backward. I'll bear it if I can live, he almost added, even under Anthony. That's a man worthy to be allowed to live. Alright. That's a man worthy to be allowed to live, alright. But as I was discussing earlier, you see that death in itself is neither good nor bad. Cato made the most honorable use of it, Decimus the most shameful. Anything that has no glory of its own takes on glory when virtue is added to it. Metal is neither cold nor hot in itself. It grows hot when struck in a furnace and cools off again when plunged into water. Death is honorable by way of what's honorable, namely virtue, and a mind that disdain outward appearances. But Lascillus, even amongst the things we call intermediate between good and bad, they are distinction to be made. Death is not indifferent, in the same way as whether you have an odd or even number of hair on your head. Death is among those things that are not bad, but nevertheless have an outward appearance of badness. For the love of one's own self and the desire to maintain and preserve oneself are deeply rooted along with an aversion to annihilation, which seems to strip away many good things from us and take away from the abundance of things to which we are accustomed. And this too exchanges us from death, that we know what is here before us, but don't know what the things are like that we will cross over into, and we dread the unknown. Then, too, our fear of darkness is a natural fear, and death is thought to be leading us into darkness. So, even if death is an indifferent, it's not the kind of things that can be easily ignored. It's not the kind of things that can be easily ignored. The mind must be hardened by a great training program to endure to look on it and see it approach. Death oath, death oath to be scorned more than death, death oath to be scorned more than it customarily is. We take many things about it on faith, and the talents of many strive to increase its ill reputation. There are descriptions of a subterranean prison house and the realm shrouded in eternal night, in which the huge door guards of Orcus stretches out over half-eaten bones in a gore-spidered cave, barks forever to frighten the bloodless shade of the dead. Even if you believe that these are fables, and that nothing remains in the afterlife to frighten the dead, a different terror creeps in. People are just as afraid of being in the underworld as of not being anywhere. With these things working against us, poured into our ears over long stretches of time, why will it not be glorious to die courageously? One of the greatest achievements of the human mind. The mind will never strive for virtue if it thinks death is an evil thing. It will, though, if it considers death an indifferent. Epistle 82, 10-17. It's fitting for you to experience pain and thirst and hunger and old age, if that is a long delay in the human world befalls you, and illness and loss and death. But there's no reason to trust those who make a great din of all around you. Nothing of these things is bad, nothing is unbearable or harsh. Fear attaches to them only by consensus. You fear death, but your fear is only a rumor. And what could be more foolish than a man who's afraid of words? Our friend Demetrius often says that the words of the ignorant issue from the same place as the rumbling of their guts. What matters to me, he says, whether they sound off from up top or from down below. It's altogether mad to fear being disgraced by the disgraceful. And likewise, just as you have no cause to fear evil rumors, so you have none to fear the things you would not fear unless rumor had commended it. No good man would take harm from getting spattered by nasty rumors, right? Death too, has a bad reputation, but let's not allow that to harm it in our eyes. None of those who bring charges against it have ever tried it, and it's impudent to condemn what you know nothing of. But you do know, at least, how many have found death helpful? How many of it has released from torture, poverty, lamentation, punishment, fatigue? We are in no one's power if death is in our power. Epistle 91, 18 to 21. The passage below is preceded by a description of the celestial plane of serene contemplation to which philosopher's mind can rise. In its final sentence, Seneca demonstrates one of his greatest rhetorical talents, a sharp eye for trenchant, pointed analogies. When the mind raises itself to its sublime level, it becomes a manager, not a lover of the body, as though when the mind raises itself to this sublime level, it becomes a manager, not a lover of the body, as though this were its necessary burden, as though this were its necessary burden. It does not become subject to what is. It does not become subject to what is was, but put in charge of. It does not become subject to what it was put in charge of. No free man is slave to the body. No need to mention the other masters that emerge from an excessive concern over it. The body's own dominion is gloomy and demanding. The man of temperate mind leave his body. The great-minded man leaps out of it. No one asks what its end will be after it's been left behind. But as we ignore the clipping from our beards and hair, just so that divine sort of mind as it prepares to leave its human form, judges that the destination of its container, whether fire burns it, or earth covers it, or wild beast tears it apart, matters as little to it as the afterbirth does to an infant. Epistle 92.93 to 34. And that would be the end of today's video. This was a philosopher guide to the end of life. I'm Ivan, and I hope you are having a great day. Be good people. Bye.